I used to think living deep in the woods meant people would leave you alone. Turns out, it just makes corporations think you're invisible. My place sat on 14 acres outside a little town in northern Tennessee. Nothing fancy, just an old cedar cabin my grandfather built by hand back in the 70s, a creek that cut through the property like a silver vein, and enough trees between me and civilization that I could go 3 days without hearing another human voice. That silence was the reason I stayed there after my divorce, after the layoffs, after life kind of folded in on itself. Out there, nobody cared who you used to be. Then Ridgeview Shores showed up, and suddenly every rich idiot from Nashville wanted to experience nature from the comfort of an infinity pool and imported Italian stone patios. They bulldozed half the valley in under a year, dropped 30 luxury homes around an artificial lake they dug with excavators the size of tanks, built a clubhouse with a fake rustic fireplace that looked like it belonged in a ski resort brochure, and every weekend they threw these loud, tequila-soaked parties where middle-aged real estate couples danced to country remixes until 2 in the morning like they were auditioning for a Bravo reality show. At first, I kept my distance because honestly, developments like that always implode eventually. Somebody cheats on somebody, somebody gets sued. HOA drama starts eating itself alive. It's practically suburban law. But then the smell started. Real faint at first, like something dead upstream, only on hot afternoons. I figured maybe a deer got trapped somewhere in the creek bed. Then the water started turning brown. Not muddy brown after rainstorms. Thick brown, oily brown, the kind of brown your instincts recognize before your brain catches up. I remember standing there one morning holding a coffee mug, staring at that creek thinking, no way. There's no damn way. So I followed it uphill through the trees until I found the source, and that's when my whole understanding of humanity dropped about 10 floors. Buried beneath a layer of fresh dirt was a massive PVC pipeline running straight from Ridgeview Shores, cutting diagonally across my property like they owned the place. I just stood there blinking at it because my brain genuinely couldn't process the audacity. These people had secretly routed their entire sewage system through my land. No easement, no warning, no permit taped to a tree, nothing. They literally turned my creek into their private toilet because apparently building a real treatment system would have hurt profit margins. I called the development management office immediately and got transferred to a guy named Brent Collier, the property operations manager, one of those polished corporate dudes who sounds like he irons his khakis before conference calls. Soon as I mentioned the pipe, his whole tone changed. "Oh, that line's been there a long time," he said real casual, like he was talking about an old fence post. Protected under grandfather provisions. I almost laughed. The development wasn't even 3 years old. You know when somebody lies so badly, it actually insults your intelligence? That was Brent. So I drove into town, marched into the county records office, and spent 4 straight hours digging through property filings until I found the paperwork. That's where things stopped being shady and started becoming criminal. Ridgeview Shores had actually submitted an easement request 6 months earlier, except the signature approving it was supposedly mine. Only problem was, I never signed a damn thing. They forged my name, filed it anyway, got rejected by the county, then decided to keep pumping raw sewage through my property like none of the rules applied to them. And here's the part that really got under my skin. They were betting on me staying quiet. See, people like Brent count on a certain kind of intimidation. Big development versus one guy in the woods. They assume you don't have money, don't know the law, don't have the energy to fight back. That's the business model. Exhaust people until they surrender. When I called Brent back and mentioned forged documents, environmental violations, and criminal fraud, his voice suddenly softened up real quick. "Maybe we can work something out here," he said. "Compensation, maybe." Compensation. Like he was offering me store credit because they accidentally shipped the wrong blender. Meanwhile, my creek smelled like an interstate truck stop bathroom in July. I told him they had 30 days to reroute the line legally, or I'd bury them in every environmental agency I could find. He actually chuckled, like I was bluffing. Then he hung up on me. Biggest mistake that man ever made. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where people watching from the outside usually say something like, "Well, why didn't the HOA just pay him?" And the answer is simple, because organizations like that survive on psychological pressure. Seriously, once you've dealt with enough developers and aggressive HOAs, you start noticing the same pattern over and over. This is a psychological trap. They create the illusion that fighting back will cost you more energy than giving up. They assume regular people will fold the second legal jargon enters the conversation. According to standard procedure, any utility line crossing private property requires documented easements, environmental review, county approval, and direct owner consent. That's not optional paperwork. That's basic property law 101. But from a legal perspective, what Ridgeview Shores did was even worse because they allegedly forged authorization documents after the pipeline was already installed. That changes the whole situation from civil dispute territory into potential fraud and environmental liability, which is the kind of thing that makes corporate attorneys suddenly stop smiling during meetings. And here's the thing most people don't realize about HOAs and luxury developments. A lot of them are built on image management. Not reality, image. They spend millions making residents feel exclusive, protected, elevated above everybody else. So the second something ugly threatens that illusion, panic spreads fast. Because once homeowners realize their luxury dream community might actually be dumping sewage illegally through a stranger's land, trust collapses overnight. The lesson here is, people with money often mistake silence for weakness. They think if someone lives alone, talks slow, dresses simple, maybe drives an old truck, that person must be powerless. But sometimes the quiet guy in the woods has patience, records, and just enough spite to become a very expensive problem. So after Brent hung up on me, I stopped trying to be polite. That phase was over. I started making calls the next morning before sunrise, coffee in one hand, county numbers written on a paper plate because I couldn't find a notepad. Health department first, then state environmental protection, then the regional EPA office. By noon, I'd filed so many complaints, I probably ended up on some government watch list for angry mountain man with paperwork. But here's the funny thing. Once agencies hear the words unauthorized sewage discharge in a protected waterway, everybody suddenly starts answering emails real fast. Within 6 days, Ridgeview Shores looked like a federal crime scene. White trucks everywhere, inspectors walking around with clipboards and water testing kits, residents standing outside in expensive golf clothes pretending not to eavesdrop while absolutely eavesdropping. I watched half of it through binoculars from my porch like it was premium cable. Brent spotted me once from across the lake, and you could literally see the blood pressure spike hit him in real time. That alone was worth the stress. But the real turning point came when one of the county inspectors explained something important. Since the pipeline crossing my land had no valid easement and was currently under investigation, I had legal authority to restrict access to the affected portion of my property for environmental protection purposes. Now, he didn't specifically tell me to block the pipe, but he also didn't tell me not to. And once that idea got into my head, it stayed there like a song lyric you can't stop hearing. 2 days later, I hired an excavation contractor named Dwayne, a giant ex-Marine with forearms like bridge cables who showed up chewing sunflower seeds and driving a bulldozer that looked old enough to remember Vietnam. He asked what exactly we were building across the creek, and I told him, justice. He laughed for a solid 30 seconds and said, hell, I'll give you the neighbor discount. We built the earth dam right over the section where the illegal pipeline crossed the creek bed, compacted dirt, gravel reinforcement, drainage control, all perfectly legal under temporary environmental containment measures. That part matters, by the way. I wasn't vandalizing anything. I was protecting my water source from contamination pending investigation. Huge difference. The effects started faster than I expected. First came the smell. Then maintenance crews started racing around Ridgeview Shores like ants after somebody kicked the nest. Apparently their system had been designed around continuous outflow pressure, meaning once my dam interrupted that route, everything backed up through secondary channels. Storm drains overflowed first, then irrigation runoff areas. Then residents started complaining about toilets bubbling and strange odors inside homes. I'd almost feel bad if these people weren't still driving around with luxury living starts here, banners hanging at the entrance. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what happened during the summer white party. God himself could not have written better timing. Every July, Ridgeview Shores hosted this massive resident gala around the community pool, catered seafood, string lights hanging from palm trees they had trucked in from Florida because apparently Tennessee wasn't tropical enough. Women in white dresses, men pretending they understood wine. Around 200 people showed up that night. I know because I could hear the live band echoing through the trees while I sat on my porch eating ribs and watching fireflies. Then somewhere around sunset, the screaming started. At first I thought maybe somebody slipped near the pool, but it kept going. Loud. Continuous. Panicked. So I grabbed my binoculars and looked toward the clubhouse. And folks, I swear to you, that giant resort-style swimming pool had transformed into Old Faithful from hell. Brown water was erupting out of the filtration system in 30-foot bursts, spraying across deck chairs, buffet tables, and horrified residents dressed entirely in white linen. People were running in every direction, women holding their shoes, men gagging into decorative bushes. One guy actually dove into the artificial lake, trying to rinse himself off, which somehow made the whole thing even sadder. The best part? The pool pumps kept cycling because the system automatically tried to correct contamination levels, which basically turned the entire recreational area into a sewage sprinkler network. You haven't truly witnessed karma until you've seen a millionaire sprint through a cloud of his own neighborhood's wastewater carrying a crab cake platter. I nearly fell off my porch laughing. The next morning, Brent called me in full panic mode. No corporate polish left anymore. Just pure desperation bleeding through the phone. "You're destroying property values," he shouted. "Residents are threatening lawsuits. This is sabotage." I remember leaning back in my chair real slow before answering. "Brent," I said, "you illegally dumped sewage onto my land for almost 3 years." Silence. Then he tried another angle. "People have children here." That one almost impressed me. Suddenly, he cared about public health. I told him the same thing I'd said from the start. Either build the treatment infrastructure you were legally required to build in the first place, or negotiate lawful access to my property like civilized adults. But the free ride was over. He started threatening attorneys, injunctions, damages, all that usual rich guy panic language. Problem was, every government agency already knew about the illegal pipeline by then. Every angry homeowner knew too. And once HOA residents realized they've been lied to, they become absolute savages. Within weeks, the internal lawsuits started piling up. Homeowners sued the HOA board for negligence. The HOA sued the developers. The developers blamed subcontractors. Subcontractors started leaking emails to protect themselves. One engineering consultant claimed he warned them 2 years earlier the temporary routing system violated county code. Another alleged executives intentionally delayed treatment plant construction to keep quarterly profits high before selling remaining lots. It turned into a full-scale corporate feeding frenzy. News stations showed up next. One local reporter stood outside the Ridgeview entrance wearing rain boots while talking about possible biohazard exposure. You could practically hear property values collapsing in the background. Realtors stopped bringing buyers through the neighborhood entirely. Residents started covering the Ridgeview signs with garbage bags because people in nearby towns had begun calling it Poop Lake Estates. Honestly, brutal, but earned. Meanwhile, cleanup crews worked around the clock, trying to contain overflow damage. Vacuum trucks rolled in daily. Entire sections of landscaping got ripped out. The pool had to be drained repeatedly because every attempted restart pushed more sewage back through the compromised system. And every single time Brent begged me to remove the dam temporarily, I reminded him the county investigation was still active and environmental protection came first. Funny how legal language sounds different once it's pointed the other direction. About a month into the disaster, county officials finally dropped the hammer. Ridgeview Shores got hit with massive environmental fines, mandatory infrastructure reconstruction orders, groundwater remediation requirements, and emergency oversight monitoring. The developers were forced to build an actual treatment facility at their own expense, which cost them millions more than doing it correctly from the start would have. That's greed for you. Shortcuts are only cheap until reality sends the invoice. Brent came out to my cabin personally after that. First time I'd ever seen him without a tucked-in polo shirt. Man looked exhausted, like somebody had vacuum-sealed the ego right out of him. He handed me a settlement offer worth more money than my property had originally cost me 20 years earlier. Full creek restoration, soil replacement, long-term environmental monitoring, legal fees, all of it. And you know what? I accepted. I'm stubborn, not stupid. But I kept that dam exactly where it was until every inch of a legal pipe got removed from my land under county supervision. I stood there watching excavators pull those sections out of the ground one by one like surgeons removing a parasite. Best closure therapy money never had to buy. A few months later, the creek finally started running clear again. The smell disappeared. Wildlife came back. Peace came back too, eventually. Ridgeview Shores still exists, technically, but around town nobody talks about the golf carts or luxury homes anymore. They just remember the summer the millionaires turned their own pool into a sewage geyser because they thought one quiet guy in the woods wouldn't fight back. You know, the older I get, the more I realize stories like this are never really about sewage pipes or HOAs or lawsuits. That stuff's just the packaging. What they're really about is arrogance. Ridgeview Shores didn't collapse because of one blocked pipeline. It collapsed because too many people inside that machine believed money erased consequences. They thought expensive homes automatically made them smarter than everybody else, cleaner than everybody else, more important than the guy living quietly in the woods with dirt on his boots and an old pickup truck in the driveway. And honestly, that mentality shows up everywhere now. Corporations, HOAs, developers, even regular people sometimes. There's this weird cultural disease where folks start believing convenience matters more than integrity. If cutting corners saves enough money, somebody in a boardroom will eventually convince themselves the risk is manageable. Until reality hits like a freight train full of human waste. According to standard procedure, property rights exist for a reason. Environmental regulations exist for a reason. Easements, permits, inspections, all that boring paperwork people love mocking, that's the thin line stopping powerful organizations from doing whatever the hell they want to people with less money. From a legal perspective, Ridgeview Shores probably could have negotiated access to my property the right way from day one. I might have even agreed if they'd approached me honestly. But deception changes everything. Once somebody forges your name and starts poisoning your land behind your back, the issue stops being business and becomes personal. And that's another lesson people forget. Quiet people are not weak people. Sometimes they're just patient. Sometimes they're watching. Sometimes they're giving you every possible opportunity to do the right thing before they decide to become your worst problem. This is a psychological trap a lot of arrogant people fall into. They mistake kindness for surrender. They assume calm voices belong to powerless people. But pressure creates strange kinds of strength, especially in people who already lost enough in life that they're no longer scared of conflict. The lesson here is simple. If your success depends on exploiting people you think can't fight back, eventually you're going to meet someone who can. And when that happens, all the polished branding, HOA newsletters, luxury amenities, and corporate buzzwords in the world won't save you from consequences. Anyway, that's my story. And honestly, I'm curious what you think. If you found out a luxury development was secretly using your property like this, would you have taken the settlement immediately? Or would you have kept that dam in place a little longer just to make a point? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where entitled people learn extremely expensive lessons, stick around, because trust me, this wasn't even the craziest thing I've seen happen in HOA country.